Hooray! Today I celebrate because I lost 30 kilograms or 66 pounds. And you know what? It wasn't so bad. It only took me about 30 years. Yes, my friends. I am a 49-year-old man, and like many of you, men and women, I struggled all my life with weight loss, eating disorders, and unhealthy lifestyles. I started off as a chubby teenager, became an overweight young man, and transitioned slowly into a severely obese middle-aged man, heading at a brisk pace towards type 2 diabetes, heart failure, and all the other wonderful health challenges associated with obesity. But luckily, a little short of my 50th birthday, I got on top of my challenges and lost 30 kilograms. Which, while it does not make me reach my ideal weight, it is still a tremendous achievement. I decided to share the lessons of my journey with you on this public platform, aware of the potential abuse that I might encounter, given the nature and toxicity of today's internet. I decided to do that because I think that I do have an interesting story to share. I think that the insights I gained over so many years by having a lifelong struggle with food and weight loss are worth sharing. And more important of all, I realized that the solution is less in what we eat per se or how we exercise, but it's more in how we define our relationship with food as well as our relationship with our own body. And, if nothing else, I promise you it'll be entertaining. So let's start. My breakthrough happened, as it is often the case, in one of the lowest points of my life, and at a point where after nearly 30 years I tried everything. Unsuccessful dieting, successful dieting followed by yo-yoing, daily exercise routines, weight loss medication, intuitive eating techniques, apps, gyms, electric bands for weight loss, you name it, I tried it. The most important question that troubled me was, how come, given the size and variety of the weight loss industry, which includes tons of diets, tons of exercise routines, equipment, facilities, lots of information, websites, apps, devices, how come that such a $225 billion weight loss and exercise industries are completely unable to solve these chronic and dangerous problems of our modern societies, which is obesity? Well, the answer is probably very complex, and it touches many areas of our socio-political and economic systems. But if I want to really compress it down to one thing, is that we are conditioned to look at the weight loss like it's a race. It has a starting point where we start dieting and purposefully exercising, or taking Ozempic, or employing other weight management techniques. And it has a finish line where if we succeed with our goals, the reward of this race is that we can get back to the original habits that bring us slowly at the beginning in an endless vicious cycle. The problem is that the emphasis of the process is on losing weight fast, with a focus on what to do right now, and without a plan or strategy for the future, without things like mitigation plans in case we don't succeed, or identified barriers and threats to our way to success, and in general lacking a forward focus on the future. Before I'm going to get too philosophical and too abstract, let me exemplify this process for you. Our race to lose weight typically starts with a big motivation. Sometimes this motivation is rooted in something dark, like passing of a loved one, or a divorce, or a breakup, or some sort of bad news from the doctor, a bad diagnosis, a bad blood test, etc. Other times the motivation is rooted in something more positive, like your wedding, or maybe somebody else's wedding, or even simply the arrival of the beach season. Once the motivation sets in, a goal is set usually on the form of, I need to lose X kilos. So you grab a readily available and trendy weight management system from the shelf. A diet regimen, an exercise routine, gym membership, a new app or device, or medication like the popular Ozempic. With these new tools at your disposal, you start enthusiastically the race to your goal, and usually the first part is great. The motivation is high at the start and drives you to compliance with your methods. You follow the diet rigorously, you go to the gym like clockwork, and the results show. Because the first part of any dieting, usually the results are faster and more visible. Your high motivation is matched by great results, makes you feel great. But somewhere on your way towards the goal, things are getting more difficult. Motivation shrinks, monotony and fatigue settles in, and with that also the compliance to follow the dieting or exercise routine selected. The slope of progress gets a bit more flat, resulting in a low motivation matched by a low performance. And this combination will invariably result in a loss of self-esteem and even in sometimes depression. Alas, at this point, many people abandon their race and go back to their old unhealthy habits, or even worse, this failure can make them feel worthless and they start using food for stress management or to cope with their depression caused by their unsuccessfully bid to lose weight. You can see how this is a vicious circle and a lose-lose situation overall. Okay, you might now think, but what about those who do succeed? They'll be fine, right? Unfortunately, this is the paradox. Even for the many or even most of those who manage to get all the way to their goal, who knows why? Maybe they had more realistic goals to begin with, maybe more discipline or maybe more effective tools. But even they often don't have a plan for after, and what happens way too often, unfortunately, is they go back to their original habits with unstructured eating and sparse exercise, and slowly but surely they go back to their original state, waiting for the next motivation boost for another round. This cycle, commonly known as yo-yoing, it is very destructive because what people don't realize is that in each subsequent cycle, you start from a higher weight point and older age, which makes it so much more difficult than the previous cycle. So this brings us to, drum roll, axiom number 1. Stop looking at the weight loss as a race and at the extra kilos as your adversaries or enemies, but frame the problem like trying to build an attached relationship with your body, a relationship full of patience, consistency, love, and compassion. It is also strange, just like in other lifelong relationship you have, like the one with your children or your spouse, where if we're carefully that their needs are met and we interact them in a consistent way with patience, love, and compassion, we will have good marriages, we will raise happy and resilient kids. In a very similar way, if we build a strong attached relationship with our bodies and apply the same values, the fruits of our labor will be plentiful. Not only we will live longer, but however long we live, we will enjoy a quality of life which is going to be good. We will feel good, we will feel full of energy, we will not have pains or other discomforts, and we will have a positive body image which will contribute to our mental health. And age will not be such a big barrier to our favorite activities, and we will be able to do these activities such as tennis, golf, skiing, sailing, hiking, you name it. We will be able to do these until very late in our lives, and we will be able to enjoy all this with our kids and grandkids. And if this is not motivation enough, I don't know what it is. Now, let's go for the fun part. I'd like to tell you my weight loss story from when I was a young man until now, with all the ups and all the downs, and with all that I tried, aka everything. What worked and did not work for me, and what was my decision process every step of the way. So here is my story. The first time I tried to reduce my weight, I was in my early 20s when I got married. Given my young body, the fact that I was not too overweight at that point, and the fact that I was pretty active to begin with, I was actually able to reduce my weight and keep it under control only with exercise. I went to the gym 3 to 4 times a week and I was running 45 minutes to an hour on the treadmill. Mostly low aerobic exercise as it was a trend at the time, plus 1-2 times per week a moderate weightlifting program, plus a generally active lifestyle. It was a lot of exercise, but I was young and had more free time and it kept me relatively fit. The second time I tried to lose weight was in my early 30s when I got divorced. This time I tried the same, but the physical exercise alone was not enough. Remember what I said earlier about yo-yoing? I had more weight to lose and a body that was less cooperative. So, in addition to the usual exercise regime of running on the treadmill and some weight training, I added a calorie count type diet. I was not ready to let go of many of my things I like to eat. It was the time when the smartphones were becoming popular, and I used an app to help. At this point, every time I had tried to lose weight, I succeeded. So in my mind, there was no doubt that when I need to do it, I can do it again. But unfortunately, this is not how it worked, and I was up for a big, unpleasant surprise. 10 years later, after I turned 40, I was severely overweight, and my doctors were threatening that I will have major health problems. In fact, I already had. I started to have severe sleep apnea. The high blood pressure that I already had for decades was more difficult to manage, and the sugar was quite high. It was time for a change, especially that I had a young child that I was hoping I can live long enough to see him through, and healthy enough to actually be active together, teaching him and playing with him sports, as all my life I had a fairly active life. I was not able to do any aerobic sport activity for too long. I was obese and completely out of shape. So I started the same way as before, gym and calorie count. But this time it did not work. A demanding career, a new family life made it very difficult to keep a constant schedule at the gym. And the calorie count did not work as well, most likely because I was eating out a lot. So estimating how much I ate became very difficult to do. So I was chronically eating more than my estimate. My compliance was thus pretty low, despite of a fairly high motivation. To add insult to injury, I used food as a stress mechanism and as a reward mechanism. When I was stressed, I was eating and not anything, mostly sweets, and when I needed a reward, I was treating myself to a great tiramisu and other delicious treats and pastries. Given that I was suffering of eating disorders, at the advice of my doctor, I went to see a nutritionist. That did not work very well because, of course, the problem was not that I did not know in theory what I needed to do. The problem is that I did not know how to do it, and the nutritionists were trained in the intuitive eating philosophy where you have to tune your body on how to eat healthy and at correct quantities. But when you have to lose a lot of weight, this is in my opinion the wrong approach. If you're overweight by a few pounds or you are struggling to maintain your weight, their advice was great. But when you have to lose 30 kilos, which was the distance to my ideal weight at the time, this slow approach was not working. I needed something effective and sustainable, and they were not able to provide it. But the one excellent advice from the nutritionist, though, was to not eat out, because the restaurant food has a lot of salt, fat, and sugars, because their goal is to make the taste good and not to be healthy. I lost about 5 kilos just by doing that, but I eventually plateaued and then I put them back with interest, because this is a real problem. After that, I tried Ozempic. It started well at low dosage. I did not have bad side effects and I lost again around 5 kilos, but then I plateaued. The doctor increased the dose. I was fairly far from the maximum dose given my weight, but higher dose made me feel very sick, so I had to stop it. And once again, I put these kilos back again with interest. At this point, I was again around 35 kilograms from my ideal weight. Next, I tried to combine diet and exercise. Tried again calorie count and cooking more at home, combined with a lunchtime 30 minutes of high-intensity exercise 3 times a week at a gym near my work. After a couple of months, I lost maybe 2-3 kilos. Now, the problem was not the compliance. I went for 2 months at the regular schedule. But the problem was that 30 minutes was not enough, given that I was so out of shape, so that whatever was high intensity for me was not objectively a very high intensity exercise. Additionally, my eating disorder for stress and reward were far more powerful and more impactful than any exercise I could ever do in 30 minutes. So I stopped, and next thing I knew, I put back in more, and I was now 40 kilograms from my ideal weight. After that, I tried the AI-based Noom and Simple apps. Both of them were advertising very aggressively with pop-up messages everywhere in my mailbox and my web browsing. I tried Noom first. Foolishly, I fell for their high claimed success rate, and I went over the entire process and started a license for 3 months. To clarify for the viewers, both Noom and Simple are pretty straightforward evolution of the old calorie counting app. The evolution being a calorie counting app with a ChatGPT style agent that gives you information and advice, split between nutritional information and advising and using psychological reasoning for why we are eating, what we are eating, and trying to curb overeating. I tried Noom first, and after a while I tried Simple. To be very clear, both apps are very well done, very polished and interesting. Noom has a scoring mechanism for the food you eat and presents reporting and advice based on the data you input. Simple is very similar, with more emphasis on the psychological aspects of the nutritional process. For me, particularly, it did not help much. Probably because for me the issue was not that I did not know all the information provided. And beyond that, both apps are simply calorie counting apps. Next, I tried keto for nearly 2 months. My experience with keto was hilarious, like taken from a movie. I read all the info from the internet, I bought the strips to tell you if you're in ketosis or not, and I started. Keeping up to 20 grams of carbs, it was nearly impossible. Maybe this is why I never got into ketosis. On the other hand, because such a strict diet makes it very difficult to manage the home meals and removes any social aspect from going out or being invited at friends, or is completely impractical when going on vacation. After 2 months, I decided to stop because while I did not gain anything, I also did not really lose anything. Then I tried intermittent fasting because it is fairly flexible. I started with 12-12, so 12 hours of fasting followed by 12 hours of eating. And I also tried 14-10, which is 14 hours of fasting and 10 hours of eating. Both had zero impact despite nearly 100% compliance. Then I tried 16-8, which means 16 hours of fasting followed by 8 hours of eating. And it did have an impact, but relatively low. I lost about 4 or 5 kilos, after which I plateaued. I was not able to try the best one, which is 18-6, meaning 18 hours of fasting and 6 hours of eating, as it was too drastic for me. But to be fair, I did not combine it with any other diet or exercise, but by itself the impact was modest. Last thing I tried was weight training with a friend of mine that knows very well how to do it. And he helped me create a routine and also kept me company because I don't really like weight training. I find it excruciatingly boring. I started working out with him, but for weightlifting you need a lot of time. I generally allocated 1.5 hours 3 times a week. But in reality, this was not a lot of a workout. This is, in my opinion, the biggest problem with weight training. It takes a long time because with breaks between sets and moving around the gym, time just flies by. In 90 minutes, I could maybe do 20 to 25 sets, which means around X exercises with 3 sets each. Finally, I was not even able to keep this up. My friend was not happy that I was canceling on him too often, so I went back to my usual status quo, and next thing I knew, I was now 45 kilo more than my ideal weight. What a mess. The breakthrough. At this point, I was also very depressed, and this is where this story really starts. I was nearly 50 years old with a lot of chronic issues, most related to obesity, such as high blood pressure that was not anymore controlled with medication very well. I had severe sleep apnea, I had postnasal drip, I was sick very, very often. I was borderline diabetic. I came within 0.1 on the hemoglobin A1C test to a formal diagnosis. I had frequent acid reflux and had a BMI of 40.5. In Canada, this is considered obese class 3. To get some perspective, you have overweight, obese class 1, obese class 2, and I was obese class 3. I was the highest type. I was basically half dead and not even 50 years old, and with a young child that I hoped I can offer some more quality time with his dad. I really was desperate and was scared and I was hopeless. And here's when I started to think about how, despite the trillion-dollar industries of food, nutrition, and exercise and weight loss, myself and millions of others are obese, and obesity is now epidemic in many countries, including in Canada. It really felt surreal. The main issue is that obesity is a complex problem with complex causes. For instance, I could make later on a video about how these industries do not really address the problem correctly, and often they have competing interests. But this I could not change, so I had to look also at myself and what is my role in this, and what I can and cannot control in all this, and what I can do to make it better. With some therapy, I understood what I told you earlier, that I needed to form a relationship with my body where I have to love it, but not in the sense of liking it or revering it or becoming a narcissist prick, but in the sense of taking care of my body with patience and compassion, and I have to listen to its needs carefully and respecting its limit and its desires. This is when I started first to look at food differently. Any bite in a tiramisu is great for me, but it's not so great for my body, so I needed to find a compromise. Food for stress helps my brain but kills my body. It is a reward for me, motivates me to accomplish something, but it comes at the expense of my body. I realized that I had to make many sacrifices in order to conserve and heal my body. So the first thing I did was to not use food for stress and for reward. This is extremely important due to this asymmetric nature of our in and out calorie pipelines. It is very easy to get calories in and very difficult to get calories out. Food is not therapy, it is not entertainment, and it should not be a motivator. It has to be almost exclusively used as nutrition. For stress, I can do physical exercise, and running I'm familiar with, and luckily my body could still run despite the great extra weight it had to carry around for decades. For reward, I can find something else. I can enjoy one of my favorite activities such as sailing or skiing. Okay, they are much more expensive than a cake, but a reward of a day of skiing or sailing or kiting is a great reward and worth looking forward to. Also, the reward need not be only for me. I can reward myself with taking my son playing tennis or taking my son doing something together. This is fantastic. And of course, taking my wife somewhere for some quality time. It is amazing how powerful our mind is when we push the right buttons and we look at the problem the right way. Okay, this was obviously a first step, but not nearly enough. Much more had to be done. But what? I was in Quebec City for one of my son's speedcubing competitions, and I saw in the library of the Airbnb place we were renting a book called The 4-Hour Body, an uncommon guide to rapid fat loss, incredible sex, and becoming superhuman. With such a title, it is a hard book for a heterosexual man to not at least skim through. To be clear, I'm not endorsing the book, nor I think it is worth buying, but I do give it credit that it contains a lot of information about low-carb diets. Sure, I had tried keto with no success, and I was aware of Atkins, but this book explores in a lot of detail the entire space of low-carb diets, revealing that there are many flavors and variations of such diets. And it included practical information and advice that can be used to create your own flavor of low-carb diet. And it makes you understand some of the mechanism of its actions. So step 2, smart and healthy low-carb diet. Inspired from the book, I decided to go for a custom-made, smart and healthy low-carb diet that, from what I could read in this book and other resources on the internet, these type of diets are very impactful because they strike a good balance between losing weight and keep things flexible enough to ensure high compliance, even if you have a fairly busy schedule. The people that want to sell you on Atkins and ketogenic diets, they emphasize that they work so well because they enable you to reach the state of ketosis. But this is very difficult unless the amount of carbs is very small. And I was not ready to commit to this level of carb deprivation. So the huge question to ask now is, do you really need to reach ketosis to take advantage of a low-carb diet? Or perhaps a light low-carb diet that allows more manageable amount of carbs can have just the same effects? To answer this question, consider the following thought experiment. If two people, A and B, same age, same gender, same body composition and weight, they use a combination of diet and exercise that achieves the same caloric deficit delta. Will they lose weight at the same rate, independent to what they eat, when they eat, and how much they exercise? Will their BMI follow the same curve? This is a very important question because If the answer is yes, it means that weight loss is a purely behavioral problem. So the emphasis should be more on eating habits and exercise routines that are optimizing for the highest calorie deficit possible. It also means that Atkins and ketogenic diets do not work at a metabolic level, but rather they simply help people not to be hungry. However, if the answer is no, this means that the weight loss is a metabolic problem, or at least has a large metabolic component, and so the emphasis should be on optimizing the metabolic process to make it as efficient as possible. It may also mean that to reap the benefits of a ketogenic diet, you really need to work hard to reach the state of ketosis. Unfortunately, the answer is not so clear and it is a very nuance. But on average, based on my research, I would say that it is more closer to yes than to no. To be clear, factors like genetics and exercise can change the impact. For instance, if person A is more active than person B, even if A also eats more than B, keeping with the same calorie deficit in both of these two persons, in certain conditions, with the right combination of diet and exercise routine, person A can lose weight and improve their BMI faster. But if we change the problem slightly, making A and B identical twins that have the same exercise regimen, so the only difference is what they eat and when they eat, the science is really not definitive, and evidence so far points much more towards having a similar weight loss and BMI curves, as long as the caloric deficit stays the same. And this observation points to a behavioral rather than a metabolic mechanism. There's a lot of evidence to support this. For instance, it is understood that sugar spikes trigger hunger, and so a diet with mostly protein and fat that trigger less sugar variations in the blood will generate less feelings of hunger. It is also known that sugar triggers the pleasure receptors of the brain that have an addictive effect. So, conversely, avoiding sugars, we avoid overeating due to stress or addiction or from a desire to feel pleasure. Furthermore, too much sugar over long periods of time may lead to insulin resistance, a step before diabetes, which in turn makes weight loss even more difficult. On the other side, there is no evidence that people on keto lose long-term more weight than people on regular food that comply with the same calorie deficit. There's a short-term advantage that can be explained by a loss of water that is retained by the body, but this advantage dissipates with time. Overall, this is great news, because this means that the reason why Atkins diet and keto diet really work is more behavioral than metabolic. Or, in other words, people who do Atkins or keto and lose weight, it is rather because the diets help them maintain the calorie deficit over a long period of time, rather than specific metabolic changes induced by ketosis. This is the key issue here. It appears that reaching ketosis is not really necessary. So, how much carbs and what types of carbs can we have then? And this is what I came up with that seems to work for me, at least so far. Number 1, avoid completely sweets, including cakes and other baked goods. No breads, no pasta, no gnocchi, in fact no potatoes whatsoever, no rice. 2. As to what to eat with nearly no reservation, I was inspired by the Mediterranean diet. Plenty of salads, vegetables, cooked beans, and plenty of chicken and fish. At the beginning, I also consumed a lot of ham. It was very good, but too processed and too much bad fat. 3. In moderation, have hummus, cheese, and nuts. And 4, and this is important, I choose to allow myself plenty of fruits with a high fiber profile. To say fruits with a high fiber profile, it's a fancy way of saying the less sweet fruits. Apples, pears, peaches are okay. Bananas, grapes, and watermelon, less okay, because they have a lot of sugar. But having a very sweet tooth, I must confess, I needed to address these cravings I experienced, so I allowed myself sometimes very ripe bananas and sometimes grapes. Note that this is a major change from keto. With keto, you can never ever do this. With 1 or 2 fruits a day, it may already be too much. 5. Finally, also from the book I mentioned earlier, I took the idea to have sometimes a break. A day when I can eat anything I want. I think this is fair and a good compromise with my body, and of course makes things easy for special occasions such as birthdays, weddings, parties, etc. The book suggested 1 day every week, but I decided to aim for at most every 2 weeks on average, and even as to wait until there is a special occasion that deserves a break in the diet. This 5-rule plan is the first pillar of my weight loss and management system. And it worked pretty well so far. It is a very balanced pillar. On the one hand, it seems to be impactful and the compliance is good. It has built in some flexibility with a days off diet and also indulging sometimes with some sweet fruits such as ripe bananas or grapes. Also socially, it is not terrible. Most restaurants these days have enough variety of foods that fits these constraints. And for very special occasions, I can make exceptions. I do not feel hungry most of the time. I have the occasional cravings and desire to overeat, but I am working on it. Overall, I was very happy with this, and it seems to have a clear and measurable impact. But even so, at my weight, this was not enough. So I decided to also add on top of it a 16-8 intermittent fasting routine as my second pillar. 16-8 means 16 hours of fasting followed by 8 hours of eating. In the past, this intermittent fasting regimen did show some moderate impact, and it can complement the other pillar for a slight larger impact. The compliance is not 100% and I have to make exceptions for my cappuccino in the morning. But other than that, it seems to add a little bit to the mix and help me in my weight loss goal. This is about the diet, but how about the exercise? Here, I was on a more solid footing as I had tried many things in the past, so I went back to what I knew it worked well, which is running. Running is a uniquely effective exercise that packs a lot of benefits and impact into one single activity. It has a low barrier of entry, can be done anywhere outdoors or in the gym on a treadmill. It can achieve both low aerobic intensity as well as high aerobic intensity and can be turned into resistance training if you run on a hill or increase the incline of the treadmill. It was an acquired taste for me. While I did not like it from the beginning, I became to like it quite a lot. While running is a pretty well-rounded activity and exercise routine, I have neglected my arms and shoulders in the favor of the core and lower body muscles, which are what is most needed in running. So I'm starting to also add some weightlifting, especially focused on the upper bodies. It's a bit boring for me, but it is necessary. To summarize, my third pillar is a robust exercise regimen of at least 3 times a week, most weeks. A lot of running-based exercises, including running uphill for the resistance component of the exercise, and some weightlifting exercise. Relatively little so far, but I think I need to increase that in the future. Did it work? Well, let's look at the timeline. I started this approach to losing weight early March 2025, about 45 kilograms away from my ideal weight based on the BMI online calculator, so nothing fancy. By January 2025, I lost 30 kilograms, an average of more or less 3 kilograms per month, or 1 kilogram every 10 days on average. So it must have been a net caloric deficit from a diet and exercise of about 700 calories a day. It should be said that I lost faster in the beginning and I had some plateaus, and also during holidays, Christmas and New Year, the compliance was much lower, but I got there in the end. And yes, I still have 15 kilograms to go until my ideal weight, but more about it later. In March 2025, I started in the gym on the treadmill. In fact, I'm a big believer that everyone that has a weight management problem, a gym membership at a good gym is an absolute must, and the compliance with using it is critical. The good news is that we have much more gyms today than we had in my youth, and also they are much cleaner and less crowded with more equipment. When I was young, the gyms were very crowded and not very clean, and the machines, you almost always had to wait for them, and some gyms even put a limit of 30 minutes, which was not great as my routines were usually 45 to 60 minutes. I started a membership at Econo Gym next to where I live. A great franchise, relatively cheap. No frills, but clean and enough for my needs. I started slowly with 3 minutes slow running and 2 minutes walking, and improved from there. I started with 30 minutes and slowly get to 45 minutes to 1 hour. The combination of my 3 pillars, including diet and exercise, worked great. I lost 10 kilos from the starting point in about 3 months. My fitness was already much better and I did not feel very hard the change in diet. At this point, as a reward, in June 2025, I bought myself a fitness watch. I decided to go with the most expensive Garmin. Happened to be on sale, which cushioned a bit the financial blow, as they are quite expensive. But this turned out to be one of the best purchases I have ever made. Not only it was a lot of sensors, which probably many of the expensive ones have nowadays, But it is very focused on fitness, and from Garmin videos and information, I learned a lot about the fitness mechanisms and optimizing my workouts. According to the watch, I did too much low-intensity aerobic activity and too little high aerobic and anaerobic activities. But since it was working, I did not want to change much. You know the saying, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. So I continued with relatively low intensity running, which was a mistake. In the meantime, it became summer, so I could mix it up with mostly running outside, vigorous biking, some hiking, and even some trail running. What I did though to keep the watch happy, I tried my best to keep my heart rate in a relatively high zone so that it edges sometimes also the high aerobic zone. Because I noticed that it is true, doing high aerobic exercise improves very quickly your overall fitness, and you can put more effort. This is how, in 3 more months, until the end of the summer, which was beginning of September, I lost another 11 kilos, and my VO2 moved from 37, the number at the very beginning, to 40. This was a great success, if I may say so myself. Also, people around me started to notice that I lost a lot of weight, which was in itself pretty motivating. I lost by this point 21 kilograms in total. This was my first checkpoint when I went to see my physician. I felt great. My sugar level went even below the pre-diabetes level, which means normal. My sleep apnea seems to be better. Blood pressure is now well under control with medication. Nasal drip was greatly improved, so I did not need to rinse my nose 4 to 5 times a day. I was now able to run better, and in general, I felt that I'm much more fit and I had virtually no heartburns for a long period now. Given this milestone, even if everything was working great, I decided to try to expand a bit my fitness routine. I started to do a little high-intensity interval training in my runs. I would do 40 minutes of alternating, accelerating to my maximum speed, hold it there for a bit, and slowing down. I played a lot with different intervals, and this actually moved the needle a lot in terms of VO2 max, at least according to my watch. VO2 max increased quickly from 40 to 41 in about 3 weeks, and then reaching 42 by the end of the fall. I also started to do weight training, but this still requires a lot of finessing and trial and error, as I'm not yet so happy with the results. But unfortunately, during the following 3 weeks, while my VO2 max improved, my weight did not budge. Was I reaching my first plateau? Probably yes. So a lot of thoughts came to my mind. Am I doing something wrong? Was it because I changed the routine? Maybe there is some substance to the low aerobic routines and weight loss relationship. Anxiety settled in. It was September 24, a little over 6 months in my journey and about 21 kilogram lost. But I kept going. After a few weeks of plateauing, I decided to do longer and faster runs again, 45 minutes to 60 minutes, and to cut a bit on the bananas and grapes. In September, we have a lot of fresh grapes, so I felt I exaggerated a little bit. A couple of weeks later, I was back on track, lost 2 kilos, so I was at the kilogram 23 in my quest to lose 30 kilos. 7 more kilos to go. Will I make it before the end of the year, I was thinking, but the answer was no. End of September, the weight loss trajectory was slower than before. But at least I was not stuck. I pushed a bit because October was a nice month and I really wanted to take advantage and run outdoors as much as possible. October 12th, I lost in total 25 kilos. Big milestone. 5 more kilos to go. October is both my birthday and my son's birthday, so 2 consecutive weekends with a bit of indulgence. I actually put back 1.5 kilos, but I decided not to panic. After all, I did enjoy some cakes and some great food. Once in a while we should enjoy. October 30, before Halloween, and I'm back at 25 kilograms. One thing is sure, no candy for me this Halloween, and you know what, I'm okay with that. My first flu of the season. One chronic health problem I had in the past was that I'm getting very easily sick in the winter, with 3 to 4 colds every season. It is tough and makes me not enjoy the nice snowy winter that we normally have. I hoped that with my improved health to break this pattern, but alas, beginning of November, the first big cold, 10 days with no exercise and some comfort food. I did not add, but I did not lose either. So November 10, I'm still at kilogram 25. Probably I will not be able to reach my goal by the end of the year. Usually a deadline is a good motivator, but on the other hand, not sure if putting pressure on myself right now is the right move. November 10th, I did the first exercise in a while due to sickness. 30-minute interval training on the treadmill. It felt good, but I need to get back to at least doing it 3 times a week. 2 months until the end of the year, and the weather turning and my rate of losing weight at 1 kilogram every 2 weeks, so lower than before, I felt that it's not realistic to push to accomplish my goal from the end of the year. So it's now January, and I made it. 30 kilograms. The title of my video is Back from Obesity, but to be fair, even though I had lost 30 kilograms, I still have 5 kilograms to go to clear the obese threshold, and then another 10 to 15 kilograms to reach my ideal weight, depending on how you count. But it is important to celebrate the triumph and do not let your setbacks put you down. Returning from obesity required from me both radical psychological and physiological changes. On the psychological side, removing food as a psychological coping mechanism for stress and reward, and loving my body in the sense of understanding that it has needs that are important to be fulfilled, and that need to be negotiated with, and that compromises have to be made. But the radical psychological changes must be met with radical change in food and exercise. I believe that to get back from obesity, you need to maintain long-term a calorie deficit of around 400 to 500 calories from food and an average 200 to 300 calories from exercise, including plenty of resistance training to increase muscle mass. This is actually very tough. 400 to 500 calories from food means 20 to 25% less food. And an average of 200 to 300 calories from exercise, well, if you exercise 3 times a week, this means you have to do 500 to 700 calories per workout, which is a full hour or more of vigorous training. I think that the smart low carbs diet is the best way to go for most people in terms of food management, especially as insulin resistance and the risk of diabetes is very prevalent among obese people. Use lots of proteins from meat, fish, and beans for satiety to keep the hunger at bay. Add a few nuts and cheese for a bit more taste to mix things up, and use fruit as the main or only sugar and carb sources and to satisfy that sweet tooth. All these changes amount to big sacrifices, so it is critically important to find non-food replacement for the food-based pleasures that you now have to say goodbye to. It is tough, but it's worth it. Thank you for watching. If you liked it, I will post some occasionally updates, and to all of you out there, good luck.